Hello everybody and welcome to Forever Rugby on Forever Sports. And today we're going to be doing a bit of a sort of a look back at the Springbok year and doing 5 things that we learned about the Springboks, or sort of recapping the year that was. A couple of things, I mean, there was so much to talk about, so it was quite difficult to sort of whittle it down to just 5. But kind of do it quite broadly, so I'm not going to get too down to the nitty gritty, but just looking at maybe some of the accusations towards the Springboks. Were they true? What are the areas that are good for the Springboks? What are the areas that are still of a concern? Obviously, there are far more than just 5 things that you could do. So let me know what else you took out from the year down in the comments below. Still a lot of question marks over the coaching staff. Is that justified? Is that not justified? Let me know. And an interesting sort of 6 months to come for the Springboks, because no Rassie Erasmus in sort of match day activities until his ban comes to the end down in September. So it's going to be quite an interesting sort of period for the Springboks. But yeah, today we're just going to be looking at sort of 5 things that sort of we've noticed and stuff like that, and exactly what we think sort of could then build up or need to maintain going into 2022. So without any further ado, let's head over to number 1 and get through the 5. So we did a live show about this, and we discussed it quite a lot with fans and people on the channel and stuff like that. And I think something we can all agree on is the Springbok year was a success. It was a resounding success. Obviously, it could have been better. I think the Rugby Championship is probably the biggest sort of red flag in terms of those 2 Australia games. But at the end of the day, if you had to recap the Springbok year, to beat the British and Irish Lions was the biggest goal. It was always going to be the biggest goal. They then very comfortably beat Argentina. And the Australian game sort of still the big red flag, because both games against New Zealand, the first game when we lost by a very narrow margin, we were very much on par with them, and then second game we then beat them, and then we looked very good in the Autumn Nations series, went down to England right at the end, but we beat Wales, we beat Scotland, and England are a good side. So to at home to still push them that far and could have won, I think you're looking at that side and you think that it was a very successful year. It could have been incredibly successful. You beat Australia twice, and you maybe edged New Zealand, and all of a sudden you could be winning the Rugby Championship. It was always going to be a huge ask. And obviously, even if you hadn't done that and you'd beaten England, it would have been a whitewash Autumn Nations series. It would have been a fantastic end of year tour. But we had the best tour for by any Southern Hemisphere side in the Autumn Nations series. So I think it definitely was a success. It can't be disputed. It really cannot be disputed. The Springbok front row is an unbelievable force at the moment, and the depth at the moment is quite phenomenal, because we are seeing absolutely no drop off between one front row and the next, between if we rest someone, if we don't rest someone. We've got 5 or 6 props who are truly world class and two very capable hookers, and just Trevor coming in. And I think that front row has become the biggest weapon for the Springboks in terms of being able to really pick and choose who you want when you want them, and they're just scrumming anything that's put in front of them into the ground. I think you think of players who have had big development years. I think Oxenchair's had a massive year. I think that our bomb squad of Stephen Kitsoff, Malcolm Marx, and Vincent Koch together as a unit are just looking so good. And I think Trevor Nyakane is taking it up to a whole new level. The versatility and the ease at which he has switched from tight head to loose head to tight head to loose head, and yet still performs at the highest level, it's pretty phenomenal, if we're being very honest. So it's just so happy that we've probably got the biggest weapon in world rugby in terms of that front row, which just almost guarantees you penalties every single time it comes to scrum time. So something that's probably a little bit more sort of on the negative side, FLYHALF and FULLBACK continue to be a bit of a problem for South Africa. To a less degree, I think scrum half as well, because I think we really missed Faf de Klerk during the Autumn Nation series. But I think if we're looking at FLYHALF, it is a concern, because I think if we're being brutally honest, we know that Honja Parr didn't have his best year in a Springbok jersey. And, the issue then comes is after that, you've got Alton Yankees, who I thought actually had probably a better year in the Springbok jersey than Pollard did. But there's just no depth. There's no, other option. It's between these 2 players. And I think, nothing else. There's not enough competition for the jersey. If you're looking at other nations, there are a couple of FLYHALFs who can like George Ford just being left out of the England squad during the Autumn Nation series. Shows you the sort of depth that they've got at that position. And I think Springboks need to find a couple of more FLYHALFs to try and add to the mix, to just try and sort of push those 2 who are probably feeling pretty comfortable. I mean, you sit there thinking that that Pollard hasn't played particularly well, and he is guaranteed to start almost every week. And Alton Yankee has been solid enough, but he knows he doesn't need to worry about his pace because there are no flyers coming through. In terms of fullback, we have become very overly reliant on Villy Leroux, who has had sort of purple patches of form. He's been good some games, he's been pretty poor in other games. A lot of people calling for him to be dropped. I think the issue comes in terms of replacement fullback is that I don't think people could truly understand exactly what you are replacing. It's not just as simple as putting somebody on the field, the number 15 on the back. Villy Leroux has a very unique role within the Springboks, and it's about trying to find the right person to be able to fill that role. I think there's no doubt that it is a changing of the guard, that it is time to try and move on from Villy Leroux. I think that he is, with a couple of performances we are seeing, he might not be able to play at the standard we need him to come to the next World Cup. But who is the answer? I think the Springboks don't see Apri Lefasi as an immediate answer right now. They don't see Cheslin Colby as an option there right now. I think Warwick Land for me makes the most sense, but it is a very worrying predicament that we didn't get to really sort of see Damien Williams so much in the Autumn Nations series because of that concussion. He does seem to be someone that they look at as a potential replacement because he's a playmaker, he's a FLYHALF originally, so he's got that sort of side of his game to him. So I think that's a position that really needs a lot of attention next year until trying to sort of sort that out. So it's been a year of words, really, hasn't it? It's been a lot of criticism, a lot of debate, and a lot of pretty poor statements by a lot of key people. It talks about if the Springboks play the game that they are, rugby will be dead within 2 years, and it's doing nothing for the game. They're not growing the game. They're killing the game. It's boring rugby. It's terrible. Who wants to watch it? And I personally think that the entire thing has been one or two games which people have now sort of used as the norm. And as soon as the Springboks win, it's no issue there, and accept that there's sour grapes from the people that lose. And as soon as they lose, it's suddenly because of the game plan. And it's never the game plan that gets them the wins. It's always the game plan that gets them the losses. And I think you've got to be very, very honest about it. And I think that what I said from the beginning is you cannot expect a team who hadn't played for 18 months to be able to just flick a switch and be this running, attacking team, which they've never really been. They've been more attacking and they've been more running in the past. We saw a brilliant display of that in that final in Rugby World Cup 2019 against England. But at the moment, you've got to look at where we are strong. Phenomenal pack. Probably the best pack in the world. Definitely the best front row in the world. Some very good, I wouldn't say phenomenal tactical kickers, but a very, very good at kicking game, which can be very effective. And very good set pieces that we then launch off. So that's the whole idea, playing a territory-based game where you try and get yourself into good positions to then launch from the set piece. But what we did see in the Autumn Nation series, and what we actually saw throughout the year, is slowly and surely, the more the Springboks played, the more this time the squad spent together, the more they kept the ball in hand. The Autumn Nation series particularly, they kept the ball in hand a lot. And at the end of the day, 13 games played this year from the Springboks, they scored 26 tries, which is an average of 2 tries a match. They scored 334 points, which means that on an average, they're scoring 26 points every match. And this is a side who only played one Tier 2 nation the entire year, which means that against all these Tier 1 nations, even if you take the 40 points away from Georgia, they're scoring more than 20 points every single match. Now, I don't think you can really accuse a team of being boring if they're scoring 20-plus points every single match. And scoring tries. On average, they're beating 15 defenders and some. You look at some of the tries that they've scored, and who's scoring the tries. Michael Zonuma-Pimpy scoring, I think, 3 or 4 tries this year. Cheslin Colby's got a try. You look at who the try scorers are, and it's not like, it's just purely rolling more or penalty tries from scrums or just brute force at scoring tries. The Springboks are scoring tries with their backline players. Can they be more expansive? I think they definitely can. But are we seeing steps towards that? We definitely are. And I think it's frustrating when the Springboks get absolutely sort of labeled this boring brand of rugby of big brutish players running into each other and a boring kicking game, but yet everyone is silent when New Zealand took exactly the same strategy against Ireland and did kick a lot more in the Northern Hemisphere and lost, and there's no sort of calls about boring rugby and stuff like that there. Not that I'm saying that the Springboks playing more attractive rugby than New Zealand, but you've got to look at a perspective. You've got to look at each team playing to their strength and getting the job done, and it did get the job done for a lot of the time. They beat New Zealand, they beat the British and Irish Lions, they beat 1, 2 out of 3 in the Autumn Nation series. They pushed England right to the end. So I think it's to say that they're boring is easy and lazy. I think it's very, very lazy. And then the final thing is, a lot of people talking about the fact that Springboks don't deserve to be number 1. And I think that's also a lot of sour grapes. I don't think you can look at a side who have been through what the Springboks have done, bearing in mind they did not play a single match the entire year in front of a home crowd. I don't think any other nation has done that. Argentina hasn't. Argentina haven't played a single game at home. But after that, Springboks have not played a single match the entire year in front of a home crowd. They played the entire British and Irish Lions series behind closed doors, which is supposed to be when you're supposed to have a very nice big support base and to be able to use that home advantage. Obviously, there are usually a lot of travelling fans, which obviously make a big difference, but still. And then they played 2 games against Argentina and South Africa behind closed doors. They then went to Australia and played 2 games against Australia with away fans against New Zealand, which is kind of neutral, but let's be honest, far more sort of favours New Zealand than it does South Africa. And then went to Europe and played in front of packed stadiums of rival fans, stuff like that. South Africa played 1 Tier 2 nation this year. 1 non-Tier 1 nation, and that was Georgia. They played 1 test, which I think is the fewest of any nations. You know, you're looking at New Zealand, and they played sort of Tonga and Samoa and USA, and when they played Wales, it was outside the test window. You're looking at all the British and Irish Lions games, teams, you know, England, Scotland, Wales. I'm looking at playing in mid-year, you know, like USA and stuff like that. The Springboks didn't have that. They played Georgia once. They then played 3 matches against British and Irish Lions, 2 matches against Argentina, 2 matches against Australia, 2 matches against New Zealand, a match against Scotland, Wales, and England. And they lost to Australia. They were outplayed by Australia. They lost to New Zealand. They lost to England, and they lost to British and Irish Lions. So, but they also beat the British and Irish Lions, won the series. They also beat New Zealand. So to say that they're not worthy of number 1, who is worthy of number 1? You know, are you going to give it to an England who's been in the mid-year series playing against Tier 2 nations? Are you going to give it to New Zealand, who lost 2 matches in the Auto-Nation series and lost against the Springboks, and played, I think, 5 games against Tier 2 nations? I think they played 2 games against Fiji. I think 1 was against Samoa, Tonga, USA, and then the Welsh game, which was outside the test window. Does it really count? You know, so I think I don't think you could justify any other side is more deserving than the Springboks. You know, maybe other sides could. I think, you know, if New Zealand finished number 1, nobody would argue with that. But are they more deserving than the Springboks? Are the Springboks not deserving of their number 1? I don't think you can say that. I think that they've earned it. I think they had a tough year in bio-bubbles. A lot of different sort of issues that they had, which no other team had. I think the only team who really had it tougher this year was probably Argentina, who had an absolutely dreadful year in terms of travelling and bio-bubbles and just not ever having anything go their way. So those are the 5 things that we sort of picked up. Obviously, there's so much more we could talk about. But let me know what you think and down in the comments below. Smash like on the video and subscribe to the channel as well. My name is Steven. Thank you very much for watching. I'll chat to you too.